For privacy reasons, name and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events. In 2014, a seemingly ordinary getaway turned into one of the darkest mysteries in the Adirondacks. Charlie, a respected Chicago lawyer with a hidden past of corruption and cartel ties, and his wife Evangeline, a woman desperate to hold her life together, vanished without a trace. For 2 years, silence cloaked their disappearance, until a rusted water tower revealed their decayed remains, alongside evidence of betrayal, revenge, and secrets too dangerous to ignore. What began as a camping trip unraveled into a chilling tale of power, crime, and retribution. Their fate shocked the nation, but the truth was even darker. Charlie was 43. And though he wore the tailored suits and cold confidence of a Chicago lawyer, there was something in his eyes that betrayed the years of strain. His wife, Evangeline, 39, stood beside him as they drove through the winding roads of Appalachia, the late autumn mist clinging to the mountains like a veil. For her, this return was bittersweet. She had spent her childhood running barefoot through these hills, yet leaving them behind had branded her a traitor in the eyes of her kin. Charlie gripped the wheel with impatience, muttering under his breath about the backwardness of the town they were approaching, while Evangeline stayed quiet, lost between guilt and anticipation. The small settlement finally appeared, cabins scattered along dirt tracks, locals watching with narrowed eyes as the couple's rented SUV passed. At first glance, Charlie dismissed them as unimportant, but their stares held weight, an unspoken recognition that this man was not welcome here. The truth was, many of them already knew his name, not as Evangeline's husband, but as the lawyer who had once sent their sons and brothers to prison through suspicious cases that smelled of cartel money. When they arrived at Evangeline's family home, a weathered farmhouse perched on a ridge, the atmosphere turned tense. Relatives gathered, some smiling thinly, others glaring outright. Her uncle, a broad-shouldered man with deep lines carved into his face, greeted her with words that stung. So, the city girl returns, bringing her lawyer husband like a trophy. Did Chicago spit you out, or did you come here to take what doesn't belong to you? Charlie bristled at the insult, but Evangeline held his arm, whispering for him to stay calm. They were invited inside anyway, though the invitation felt like a trap. Around the dinner table, silence was thick, broken only by sharp remarks. Her cousins whispered that Charlie's kind of law was nothing but blood money, and one dared to say aloud what others thought, that Charlie had profited off the suffering of Appalachians, fabricating cases that destroyed innocent lives so his cartel clients could thrive. Charlie's fork froze mid-air, his lips tightening into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He denied it coolly, but his voice carried the arrogance of a man used to twisting truth into victory. Evangeline lowered her gaze, ashamed, because she too had begun to question how much of her husband's success was stained by deceit. Later, as the night wore on and the couple stepped outside to the cool mountain air, the hostility became undeniable. A group of men stood at the edge of the property, smoking in silence, their eyes fixed on Charlie. Evangeline shivered, muttering that they should leave early, but Charlie laughed darkly, calling them country dogs barking at shadows. Still, deep inside, unease gnawed at him. He had spent his career manipulating fear, building a reputation as a ruthless defender of powerful criminals. But here in the mountains, his reputation didn't shield him. It marked him. He could feel it in the stillness of the woods, in the weight of every stare. These people remembered what he had done, and they had not forgiven. That night in their rented cabin, the couple argued. Evangeline accused him of making everything worse by snapping back at her family, while Charlie retorted that she had dragged him into a place that hated him before they even arrived. She demanded honesty about his past, asking directly whether the rumors were true, that he had once helped cartel clients by framing innocent locals, even some from her own county. He refused to answer, deflecting with bitterness, though his silence confirmed her fears.
As she lay awake listening to the creaks of the cabin and the distant howl of the wind, she realized the truth. Charlie's past wasn't just a shadow that followed him, it was a storm that would soon swallow them both. Their return to Appalachia, meant as a bridge to family and peace, had instead become the opening of an old wound, and she could already sense that someone, somewhere in the dark, was preparing to make them pay.
The morning after their fraught arrival, Charlie awoke to the thin light filtering through the cabin's worn curtains, the silence of the mountains pressing down on him. For a moment he almost believed they had escaped the judgment of the previous night, but when he stepped outside, cigarette in hand, he noticed footprints in the dirt near the cabin door, fresh, deliberate, circling the property before vanishing into the trees. Evangeline joined him, her face pale from a sleepless night, and though she wanted to pretend they were just hunters passing through, Charlie's instincts as a man who had lived too long on the edge told him otherwise. The Appalachian air was cold, but the stares of the townsfolk they encountered later at the small diner were colder still. Conversation stopped as they entered, and eyes narrowed, not with curiosity, but with memory. One old man muttered loud enough for Charlie to hear, "Lawyer who builds cages with lies and thinks his own won't close on him." Evangeline's hand trembled as she lifted her coffee cup, realizing that her husband's sins had traveled farther than she imagined. She had thought Appalachia would only hate him for being an outsider, but no. These people knew details, whispered names, and recalled cases from a decade ago when young men disappeared into prison on evidence that had never quite added up. Charlie brushed it off with a smirk, but beneath his arrogance was unease. Cartel ties left stains that no distance could wash away, and he knew better than anyone that grudges in this world never died. They only waited. As the day stretched on, Evangeline grew restless, pressing him to confess more of the truth, and in fragments he revealed enough to shatter what trust remained between them. Yes, he had bent the law. Yes, he had falsified evidence when paid, and yes, some of those clients had cartel blood on their hands. He defended himself by saying it was survival, that Chicago law was a jungle where only the ruthless thrived, but Evangeline saw through the excuses. Her voice cracked when she told him that survival at the cost of others' lives was no survival at all. It was damnation, and now that damnation had followed them here. Their argument was interrupted by the thud of something hitting the cabin door. Charlie grabbed the poker from the fireplace and swung the door open, but only the wind met him, until he looked down. A small wooden box sat on the porch. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a rusted bullet casing and a slip of paper with one word scrawled across it: Justice. Evangeline gasped, and Charlie's face drained of color because he recognized the handwriting. Years ago, a young man from these very mountains had stood in court, framed by evidence Charlie himself had twisted, his family broken while cartel clients went free. That young man's brother had sworn revenge, but Charlie had dismissed it then as the empty threat of a hillbilly with no power. Now, in this quiet town surrounded by endless woods, Charlie realized the promise had not been forgotten. Evangeline's fear grew into desperation. She begged him to leave immediately, to drive back to Chicago before things turned darker, but Charlie's pride wouldn't allow it. He refused to run, declaring that no one here had the courage to touch him. Yet that night, as the fire died low, they both heard footsteps again, closer this time, circling the cabin like wolves in the dark. Evangeline clutched the blanket to her chest, her eyes wide with dread, while Charlie sat rigid in his chair staring into the shadows outside, knowing deep down that the storm of his past had finally arrived to collect its dead. By the third day in Appalachia, the weight of hostility pressed on Evangeline like a vice, while Charlie's stubborn pride only sharpened into recklessness. He insisted they carry on with their vacation, dragging her along forest trails and insisting on dinners in town as though pretending normalcy would banish the whispers that followed them. But the whispers only grew louder. At the general store, Evangeline noticed two men loitering near the shelves, their eyes fixed on Charlie, their murmured voices stopping whenever she drew near. Later, outside the churchyard, she saw her cousin speak hurriedly to a stranger before glancing toward them with a look that made her blood run cold. Charlie dismissed it as paranoia, though, in truth, even he had begun to feel the invisible net drawing tighter around them. That evening, when they returned to the cabin, the door was ajar. Charlie burst inside with a knife in hand, only to find the place empty but disturbed, chairs pulled away from the table, ashes scattered from the fireplace, and on the kitchen counter, another note: "Debt cannot be buried." Beneath it lay a photograph, aged and weathered, of a young man in prison uniform, the same man Charlie had once condemned with fabricated evidence. Evangeline's stomach twisted as she realized they were not simply being watched. Someone was reliving old wounds, step by step, as though preparing them for judgment. Fear turned to desperation, and she begged Charlie again to leave, but he snarled at her, insisting this was a bluff, nothing more than locals trying to scare them. Yet when she asked him quietly whether the young man in the photo had truly been guilty, his silence was answer enough. That night, the danger grew more brazen. A rock crashed through the window while they ate dinner, glass spraying across the floor, and when Charlie rushed outside, he caught sight of a figure retreating into the tree line, the glint of a rifle slung across his back. Charlie fired blindly into the dark with his handgun, but the silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise, because whoever was out there wasn't afraid. Evangeline trembled in the corner, clutching the photograph as though it explained everything, her eyes filling with tears not just of fear, but of betrayal. For the first time, she admitted aloud what she had avoided for years, that she had married a man who thrived on ruining others, who had built their comfortable Chicago life on the bones of the innocent. Charlie tried to defend himself, but his words fell flat, echoing in the hollow cabin. The shadows outside shifted again, this time accompanied by faint voices, low and deliberate like hunters corralling their prey. It was then Evangeline realized the awful truth. This was no bluff, no idle intimidation. Whoever sought revenge had planned every step, had waited years for this moment, and had no intention of letting them leave Appalachia alive. Charlie sat in silence, the gun trembling in his hand, his arrogance finally cracking into fear. In the heavy stillness that followed, Evangeline whispered a prayer, not only for their lives, but for the souls of those Charlie had wronged, knowing deep inside that justice, twisted though it might be, was finally at their door.
The fourth night in Appalachia arrived heavy with storm clouds, thunder rolling in the distance as if nature itself braced for the confrontation long in the making. Inside the cabin, Charlie sat at the table, his pistol laid flat before him, staring at it as though the cold metal could deliver him from the ghosts of his past. Evangeline, exhausted from sleepless nights, pleaded with him again to leave, to run for their lives. But Charlie shook his head. It was too late, he said. They want me. They've always wanted me. Running just makes it easier. His voice trembled, betraying a fear he could no longer mask. Around midnight, headlights cut through the trees, a pair of trucks rolling to a stop just beyond the clearing. Shadows moved in the downpour, 3, 4, perhaps 5 figures disembarking with deliberate purpose. Evangeline's heart thundered in her chest as Charlie gripped his pistol, barking at her to stay hidden in the bedroom, but she refused. Her gut screamed that his bravado would only make things worse. The front door burst open, not from brute force, but from quiet certainty, as though the men knew Charlie lacked the courage to stop them. At their center stood a gaunt figure in a soaked coat, his face partly shadowed, but unmistakable to Charlie. The younger brother of the cartel member Charlie had framed and killed years earlier. The man placed a battered file on the table, a collection of court documents, photographs, and testimonies, all tied to Charlie's corruption. "You ruined lives," the stranger said, his voice calm, almost mournful. "You thought no one would remember, but we never forget." Evangeline stepped forward, tears blurring her vision, begging them to spare her, to recognize she had no part in Charlie's crimes. The leader glanced at her with something almost like pity, but said nothing. His gaze was fixed solely on Charlie, whose hand shook violently around the pistol. For a moment, it seemed Charlie might fire, but instead he broke down, his arrogance shattering into pleas for mercy. He promised money, connections, protection from his powerful family back in Chicago, but his words sounded hollow against the roar of the storm outside. The intruders forced the couple into the truck, driving them deeper into the wilderness along a dirt road slick with rain. Evangeline clung to Charlie's arm, sobbing. Yet deep inside, she felt a strange detachment, as if watching the life she once knew dissolve into the night. They stopped at an abandoned water tower, its rusted shell looming in the lightning. The men dragged Charlie out first, forcing him to kneel in the mud. Evangeline screamed, begged, even cursed him for dragging her into his sins, but the storm drowned her voice. The leader spoke again, his tone colder now. "You stole years from us. Tonight, we take yours back." A single shot cracked through the night, echoing off the hills. Charlie collapsed, lifeless. Evangeline, trembling and drenched, fell to her knees, realizing her fate was sealed, not because of what she had done, but because of the man she had chosen to trust. The men exchanged brief words in Spanish, debating her fate, and though the leader hesitated, aware she was innocent, he ultimately nodded. No witnesses. The last thing she saw was the water tower's jagged outline as they forced her toward it, her cries swallowed by the storm.
2 years passed before anyone stumbled upon the truth buried deep in the Appalachian wilderness. Hikers avoided that forgotten water tower, a corroded relic hidden by dense undergrowth, its hulking frame cloaked in ivy and rust. In 2016, a group of surveyors from a nearby construction project wandered too far and caught the pungent stench rising from the sealed hatch. At first, they thought it was a dead animal, but curiosity pried the hatch open just enough to reveal something far worse. The sight seared into their minds, a pair of skeletons slunked together, their remains clothed in rotting fabric, one still wearing a half-decayed leather jacket with a badge tucked inside, the other wrapped in what looked like a floral scarf, clinging stubbornly to bone. Scattered nearby were remnants of bags, personal items damped with years of water seepage. A watch, still faintly ticking, clung to one wrist. The discovery sparked an immediate law enforcement response. Within hours, news vans descended on the Adirondacks, the story plastered across national headlines. Missing Chicago couple, found in rusted water tower after 2 years. Yet the horror was only just beginning. Forensic experts pieced together the grisly timeline, confirming the bodies as Charlie and Evangeline through dental records. Evangeline's death was ruled a homicide, her skull fractured, while Charlie's showed a single bullet wound. Questions erupted. Who had killed them, and why had their bodies been hidden in such a crude yet symbolic tomb? As investigators dug deeper, secrets unraveled. Files discovered near the scene, half destroyed by water but still legible, outlined Charlie's double life, his corrupt legal work, his ties to cartels, the fabricated cases, and even the evidence of the murder he committed in Los Angeles years earlier. It was no longer just a case of 2 hikers gone missing. It was a web of betrayal, power, and vengeance stretching across borders. What shocked the public most wasn't Charlie's crimes. Rumors of his corruption had circulated for years, but Evangeline's silent suffering. Friends and family painted her as compassionate, a woman who had lived in her husband's shadow, often trying to steer him toward redemption, but ultimately chained to his past sins. Her journals, later recovered from their Chicago home, revealed her fear and growing suspicion that their trip to the Adirondacks was a setup, her last entry hauntingly reading, "If he doesn't stop, they'll come for us both." The cartel's fingerprints lingered all over the case, yet the killers themselves vanished like mist, leaving law enforcement grasping at whispers.
Interpol and DEA task forces tried to pursue leads, even raiding safe houses along the Mexican border, but the trail dissolved. The true torment for the families wasn't just the brutal end. It was the lack of closure, the knowledge that powerful men had erased evidence and walked free. Public opinion split in two. Some saw Charlie as a corrupt figure who got the punishment he deserved, while others mourned Evangeline as an innocent soul caught in a storm she never created. The rusted water tower became a macabre landmark, visitors leaving flowers and carved initials on its decaying base, turning the site into a chilling reminder of how easily justice can be silenced. Media documentaries speculated endlessly, dramatizing the couple's final hours, some suggesting Evangeline may have been killed trying to protect her husband, others hinting she begged for her life to the very end. Conspiracy theories flourished, that the U.S. government had known about Charlie's cartel ties and allowed him to be disposed of quietly, that his death was less a tragedy, more an exchange, a message carved in rust and bone. For the families, the truth mattered less than the loss itself. Charlie's brother, once his greatest defender, broke down in interviews, admitting he had ignored warnings about Charlie's dealings. Evangeline's sister, voice trembling, demanded reforms to protect women from being dragged into crimes committed by men they trusted. In the end, the discovery did more than solve a mystery. It laid bare the fragile boundary between power and downfall, between guilt and innocence. The Adirondacks, once known for their breathtaking vistas and tranquil trails, carried a new story now, one whispered in campfires and reported in crime specials. The tale of a couple whose sins and silence led them into a rusted tomb in the wilderness. And though investigators eventually closed the case, marking it as unsolved with strong cartel links, the ghost of Charlie's corruption and Evangeline's silent pleas lingered, forever sealed in the corroded iron walls of that forgotten water tower.